Hey everybody! Now today's video we're going to talk about necklines. Now this is a beautiful, simple neckline. You've probably got the hang of this already. If you have and you're ready to move on to something a little bit more like this, then this video is for you. There are 3 steps: drawing out your facing pattern, making your facing piece, and then sewing it on at the end. Now I may get told off for calling it a facing because I don't think it actually is, but that's what it's called in my brain, so that's what I'm going to call it today. Here's what you're going to need to make your contrasting neckline. You're going to need your material of choice, your matching thread, a needle and some pins for the facing itself, and obviously some scissors. And to make the pattern for the facing, you're going to need some paper, a compass, a pencil, and a ruler. It does also help if you've got some sellotape, which I forgot to put in the picture. Sorry about that. You can see that I've got linen cloth here. I tend to only use this method that I'm going to show you with linen because wool doesn't need it. Wool's a lot easier to manipulate into a nice curved shape. However, with linen, trying to do it with a single layer often results in a very messy, uneven neckline. That's not to say that you can't do this method with wool. You absolutely can. It's just particularly handy for linen. Okay, so first of all I'm going to show you how to make your facing diagram. At the end it will look something like this. This is a very well loved one of mine that I reuse for quite a lot of different tunics and dresses that I make for people. I would suggest sticking yours to card. Definitely helps. So before you begin you need some measurements. You need to know how wide you want your final neckline to be. That's this line here on the inside here is going to be your final neck hole size, with the addition of the keyhole slit at the bottom if necessary. You then need to know how wide you want that coloured facing piece to be. So with that neckline width and width of the facing, you can begin drawing out your facing diagram. So, you're going to need 2 measurements here to get the sizing of the facing right. The width of the neck and head circumference. I'm going to measure the width of the neck first. I often use a ruler. Measure from the base of the neck, where the neck meets the shoulder, straight across. Job's a good one. Secondly, you can also use a tape measure, but you need to keep it nice and tight, not let it curve as you're working. Again, straight across from the base of the neck to the other side. You take that measurement at a little bit of ease, between 1/2 inch and 1 inch usually, depending on how closely you want the tunic to fit. Secondly, you need to measure the circumference of your head, the smallest size your head can get through. Place the tape measure around your head at the forehead and move the tape down over the nose down to the neck. Find the smallest circumference you can fit through comfortably. This measurement is used when drawing out the neck hole template to determine the length of the keyhole slit. When you're making a facing like this, or making for someone else who can't be present for fittings, these measurements will allow you to be precise and get it right first time. So I'm going to use measurements of a 6-inch wide neckline with a 2-inch final facing around the outside. Clearly, one piece of paper is not going to be enough, so we're going to sellotape 2 together. Now, make sure that you get both pieces as close as humanly possible. 1/2 millimetre isn't going to matter, but too much will. So, I start off, I fold it all in half with the sellotape on the inside. And this line here is going to be our midline. That line is important. You're going to be using it for all sorts of things to get the neckline straight as we go along. So, to start off, you need to decide how wide you want your facing to be. And that's where we're going to start making marks along this fold line here. So first of all, that's going to be the top. Now I've decided I want this facing to be 2 inches wide, so I'm going to take it down 2 inches and mark again. Now we said earlier that the width of our neckline was going to be 6 inches. So you take your ruler. Honestly, get one of these rulers. Metal rulers from a hardware store, B&Q, something like that. I got this one from a market at Steam Rally and it's a godsend. These are wonderful things. If you're sewing regularly, get one of these. So you can see there I've marked 3 inches, which is going to be our midpoint where we're going to start our circle from. 6 inches here, that's going to be the bottom curve of the neckline. Now again, we're going to mark 2 inches down from there to make our initial circle. Now on this piece, you can see the circle isn't all there is to it. So if you want this extended piece that's going to go around this slit here, which will be the keyhole slit in your final neckline, you need to measure 2 inches out either way there. So what we're going to do is we're going to line this up nicely. Again, another really handy thing is one of these sewing mats. I absolutely love mine. Cutting mats for rotary cutters, but they have a myriad of other uses. So we're going to mark 2 inches all the way down, come around here, mark it again, and then we're going to run a line all the way along. Check using this sewing mat. See, I've just gone a little bit off, so I'm going to use the sewing mat because it's far more accurate than I am. And there we have that line there that we're going to come back to and use later. Now, I'm sure you all remember these from school. A compass. Pop this right on the point of the middle of your neckline. I've made it 3 inches apart because my final neckline is going to be 6 inches. And lightly mark out your neckline circle. Take it up. That's about the biggest you can get it with this one. I need a bigger compass. And when you're ready, and take the compass around in another sweep to make the outside of your neckline. As long as everything's lining up, it doesn't matter if you wobble about like I do. Hello, editing weirdling here. I've just realised it's actually quite important at this point for me to explain how we calculate the slit length here. Because with this style of facing, once it's made and there's no turning back. So to calculate how long you need this slit to be, you need that head circumference measurement we did earlier. First divide that into 2. Let's say it was 25 inches, half would be 12.5, so that's what we're going to use here. So once you have your inner and outer stitch lines in place, you need to divide this circle into quarters. Easiest way to do this, it's already folded along the midline, so you're going to find that centre point that you use to draw out your circles and fold it just there, so you end up with 4 equal quarters around the circle. Once you've folded, just mark that point on the circles with your pencil. And we're ready to move on to the next stage. What we're going to do now is take our trusty tape measure and measure with the tape measure on its edge exactly around the circle, from the top round to that quarter mark you've just made. Once you've found it, grab hold and keep it firmly in place for the next step. With your other hand, you're going to find on the tape measure your 12.5 inches mark. Bring that out straight and then swivel it across until you meet your midline again. Then mark the point at which they meet. This gives you the length that you need for your keyhole slit, your minimum length. And then you can get on with drawing the rest of your facing piece in with confidence that yes, this will go over your head. That line I'm pointing to at the bottom is going to be the fancy bit of your facing, and I'll show you how to draw that out next. For this example, we're going to make the slit 3 inches long. Line everything up again. Mark 3 inches. Now, what you want to do here is measure how far up that is from the bottom of your piece of paper. It's about 3 inches there. We line this up. Yeah, that line was way off. Situations like this, trust the equipment, it's not your brain. So what you have here is your slit length now. You know that this part of your facing is going to come to here, but now you need to make a nice point at the end. Now, you can pretty much decide how you want to do this, but if you want to keep it nice and even, let's go for 2 inches down from the bottom of the slit. You're going to draw from that point there to that corner, that point you've just made where the lines cross one another. Voila! So this is the basic outline of your facing. What we're going to do now is cut around the outside. See you in a mo. Now at this point, we're going to draw in our shoulder line. Now this will match up with, if you've got a centre seam in the top of the shoulder of your tunic, it's going to line up nicely with that. If not, you're going to need to mark that halfway point on your main body piece so that you can match these lines up. Now, it's not always perfect, it depends on the shape of the person. However, generally, you want to centre your neckline so that 1/3 goes to the back and 2/3 come around the front. Don't know why it works, but it does. Now, the total circumference of our neckline is 6 inches, which makes this bit dead easy because it's going to be 2 inches down and we can use the cutting mat to get this exact. If you don't have a cutting mat, you may want to do this before you actually start cutting out and you've still got your extra pieces, because then you can just measure down the sides and draw this on as a square like we did for the corner of the point at the bottom. So that is going to be what I call the shoulder line. That's going to line up with that nice top seam. Now we need to cut out neck hole. My apologies for that truly awful wibbly wobbly line, but it's done now. So for this example, it's going to stay like that. And now we're ready to unfold our facing piece. And before we do anything else, I'm going to line up, mark nice and clearly on here, your centre lines, both at the back of the neck and on this front piece. Just move it up there to show you, just on the bottom there as well. Because what we're going to do is line those up with our cutting mat. Make sure everything's where it should be. And draw on the shoulder line. Now, if you haven't got a cutting mat and you're doing this just working without anything quite so helpful, what you can do is just take that, make sure you've got both sides, fold it, and then when you unfold you can just draw in that line for yourself there. The final step before we move on to actually working with our fabric is just to write on here a quick note saying 6-inch neck hole, 2 inches wide. Really helps. Oh, I just draw on that. So that really helps, especially if you're going to be making a lot of kit, or you're happy with what you've done and you think, oh, I wish I'd kept that pattern diagram. And we're done. We're now ready to move on to marking the outline of our facing onto our chosen fabric. Now your facing diagram is all ready to use. So you're going to cut out 2 rectangles of fabric, or 1 big rectangle, and fold it in half to make sure that you have 2 layers. And you're going to centre your diagram in the middle. Now, to get the size for this piece, you're going to measure right the way across the middle of your diagram. This is around 11 inches, so I'm going to cut a piece of fabric that's 12 inches wide to give me a 1/2 inch seam allowance on each side. You do the same again, top to bottom, and this one is just under 15, so we're going to cut a piece of fabric 16 inches long. Once you're ready to go and you're all set up, you need to start marking your fabric so that you've got a nice line to sew on. Begin by marking your centre line. You're going to hold it very still, and you're going to use your pencil or your fabric pen, or even your chalk if that's what you're using, whatever you find easiest, and make sure that you've got those centre lines nicely marked. I'm not pressing very hard on this one because it's actually the right side of one that I'm working on already, but when you do it, make sure you make nice, easy to see marks. And again, on the horizontal, mark your shoulder lines as well. Then once you've got those in place, you're going to go all the way around the outside of this circle. You may want to go around the inside bit as well, but it actually doesn't matter because we're going to mark that once we've turned the whole thing inside out. So for now, you're just going to mark your line all the way around the outside. When you've drawn your outline, you're ready to begin pinning. Now, here's one I'm halfway through. Apologies for that, but I was halfway through making it when I realised it was going to be quite a while before I did another one of these, so I should probably film the process for this video. To start off with pinning, I pin in the middle, in the quarters, just there, around this circle, just to keep that nice and still. And then I pin either side, all the way around the outside circle, because this is the part that you're going to be sewing first, all the way around the outside piece of the facing. You're going to leave a gap at the top there for turning it at the end, and I'll show you the stitch you need to use in just a moment. Okay, we're now ready to sew around the outside edge of our facing piece. I'm using a very simple running stitch here. If I show you just here, you can see that it's a very simple stitch, plain running stitch with the occasional back stitch. Because this seam isn't going to take any great force, it doesn't need to be particularly well reinforced. See here, I've started there, leaving my inch at the top there as my turning gap. Okay, so we've tied in our new piece of thread. I'm just going to go around this once more with a little knot, just to make sure it doesn't go anywhere. And then we're going to proceed with our running stitches, keeping as absolutely close as we can to that pencil mark that we made earlier. On a straight seam, running stitches are pretty fast, but with this curved seam, you need to be a little bit more precise. Now what I do, usually every 8 stitches or so, I'll go in where that last stitch came out and just do a little back stitch, just to reinforce it. What can happen with a running stitch is that you'll pull this a little bit too tight and it'll end up bunched up. So before you put your back stitch in, just make sure you're happy with the tension and continue. I don't know if you can see just there, I've ended up coming in a little bit too close. So I'm just going to come back, have another go. Now, as you can see here, I've gone off my line a little bit. So if that happens, the blunt end of your needle, just tease it out. It's irritating to have to rethread your needle, but it's far less irritating than looking at a really wonky seam after you've done all this hard work and thinking, I wish I'd just gone back and fixed that really wobbly, dodgy stitch. You can see with these stitches, I'm only catching about 4 threads with every stitch. Some of the finest examples of Viking sewing that we see have stitches every 1 to 2 threads. They're absolutely incredible. I try and get these as small as I realistically can in the time that I've got to do my making. However, the smaller you get the stitches, the stronger your end product, which is less important with something like this, but exceedingly important for things like side seams and trouser seams. Little tiny hand stitches can be very, very frustrating at first. I promise it'll pay off. I'm just noticing actually as I'm doing this with the terrible state my nails in. I apologise for that. I've been doing DIY and things that involve wood stain and things today, and unfortunately it's taken its toll on my hands. Now what's just happened there is that my thread has decided not to play ball and it's broken. So bear with me a second. Just had to get that rethreaded, and what I'm going to do is just end that run of stitching there because the thread is obviously becoming a little bit weak now, and we'll get another one for the last bit. And we're back. Recalcitrant thread has now been retired and a nice new piece has been procured. Now with this neckline, I'm using a separate spool of blue linen thread. What I often do if I haven't got a matching or a closely matching thread is just tease threads from the actual fabric itself and use them doubled up. It's particularly for seams that are going to need a lot of strength. You can run them through a beeswax block as well before you start sewing, just to give them a little bit of extra strength. It's gone off a little bit there, so I'm just going to come in, sorry, wobbling off the camera, come in there and start again. It doesn't matter so much if you go a bit wobbly that way, because you can come inside and correct, but what you really don't want to do is stitch inside of this circle, because that really will show on the outside. Now we are almost at our end point, at about there. So you just need enough room to manipulate that round, but if you leave it too wide you lose your curve at the back. And here's one I ironed earlier, because you really don't need to see that bit. Now, earlier on when I was talking about the running stitch and needing to reinforce it every now and then, what I forgot to mention is there's particular areas in which you will need to just go over each stitch a couple of times. So these very corners here, these corners here need a little bit extra, and just right at the point here, make sure that you put 2 stitches through each set of points, just to give it a bit more strength, because these bits in particular are going to get poked when we turn this inside out, because you have to prod them with something to get the point to come out nicely. I can give you a couple of hints that will make it just a little bit easier. So, first of all is this point here. Now this is going to get turned to the inside of the facing once it's turned all the way inside out. If you cut that too finely, you end up having a great deal of bother getting it to lay nicely. So you're going to leave this a little bit longer. When you start trimming, then just gently curve your seam allowance in till it's about 1/4 of an inch, 5 millimeters, something like that. Now, on bits like this, where when you turn it, this bit of fabric here is actually going to be on the inside. There's far too much of it for that to lay nicely. So what we're going to do is very carefully thin down our seam allowance to about half here, what it is further up. The same again. You've already cut your main seam allowance, you're just taking out the excess, so that you've just got a few threads either side, and as long as you're not too rough with it when you're turning it, that will be absolutely fine. Now you're going to have to do exactly the same with the point down here, because again, all of this excess fabric isn't going to want to fit nicely into that little triangle. First of all, you make a standard seam allowance cut, and I'm going to come back in here very carefully, trim it down. You can always come back and take a little bit more off, so just take it easy at first to get used to it. Now, if you look there, that should fit nicely into that gap when it's turned inside, and not overlap with the other side because you've trimmed it so carefully. to these points here. Now, instead of trying to trim this down, because the point is at a different angle, this bit's going to fold onto this side, that bit will fold onto that side. To get that point nice, what we need to do is very carefully make a diagonal slit there, just to within a couple of threads, and that should turn very nicely. If you get through the turning inside out process and you find that it's not quite flexible enough, turn it inside out, take another thread or two out. It really does come down to a thread or two with things like this. It's better to err on the side of caution than it is to regret it if you didn't. Now, coming back to this opening here, so instead of staying close like that, we're going to start to angle up to the top there. So we've got a little bit more to play with here when we fold that inside out. So we've cut in at these corners as close as we can safely get, and we've thinned out our seam allowances on the points here. That gives us the best chance to get a nice turn first time. So what we're going to do is very carefully reach up inside here. Start with the very point. Now, what's really handy here is a nail binding needle, something like that, or a darning needle. You pop that on the point there, hold on to it as it comes through, don't do what I've just done and stick the needle all the way through. It's a little bit too pointy, this one, it would appear. So once you've got it inside out, you're going to gently manipulate the threads into a nice point. Just encourage them. It takes a little bit of patience, but you can do it. Okay. Gently push your finger along the seam until you find where your next lot of points are. It's going to be just there. Gently encourage the fabric to go into the curved shape that you want. Try and keep each side equal. Sometimes you need to come back and do this again once the whole thing's turned inside out and you can see exactly where it's going. Now, don't worry about the fact that there are some ever so slight gaps in the stitching there, because this is all going to be whip stitched down at the end as well, all the way around the outside, which will hold it nicely in place. There we go, I've got the point there. You can just use a fingertip and encourage it into its natural shape, and again that can be adjusted with the iron as well. Not that I will ever film myself ironing, because I hate that bit. So once you've done those points initially, you're going to very carefully, gently turn the whole thing inside out. Now, at the moment this looks ridiculous, but here's where trusty chopstick becomes a very good friend in your sewing journey, because you take the point, you just gently persuade facing into the shape you want it to be. Again, you do this bit by bit. It doesn't all have to be right at the beginning, and the iron can work wonders before you begin to sew it on to your final piece. Now, I know I just said I'd never film myself ironing, but actually it's quite handy for you to see how this slightly baggy, misshapen monstrosity becomes an actual facing that you're happy to put on a piece of clothing. So again, I'm using my trusty chopstick just to come all the way around the outside gently, just persuading the edges into that lovely curved shape that we created with our stitching. Now, a lot of it at this stage is using your fingers to just encourage it into where you want it to be. Every now and then just check your seams to make sure that you've not got anything too folded. Sometimes it does like to disappear inside itself, which is not what you want for a nice final curve. Just going to keep easing until we're happy. Now, this edge here, this is where we left our excess seam allowance. We're going to roll that inside. Now, sometimes it's very, very difficult to get this to be absolutely even. What you need to do is pick a front and a back side. So have a look. Your facing piece, which side do you want to be the front? I think this side looks a lot nicer. Has less flaws in the linen, so I'm going to make this my upper side. So what you can see is happening here. So that's rolled in a little bit too far. I'm going to roll it back up, tuck the bottom inside because you're not going to see that side. And then you're going to make your nice curve this bit. I'm reasonably happy with that, and now we're going to press it and make sure everything's good after we finish pressing. What you want to do when you begin is just press downwards. Don't rub your iron across because then you're going to make these seams roll up. And then it won't be nice and neat anymore. Now here, it's trying to roll, so we're just going to tuck it back under and press again until we're happy. Once you're confident everything was where you want it, you can start to move your iron a bit more forcefully. Trust me, little taps like this at the beginning are the way to go. Especially if you hate ironing as much as I do. I literally only own an iron so that I can make sewing projects. And occasionally, very occasionally, go to special occasions. Hate ironing with a passion, however I do love what it does for my sewing. And here we have our finished contrasting piece. So what we need to do now, go back to our template, our pattern diagram that we made earlier. Make sure you're happy with which is going to be your front and back side before you start this process, because once you've drawn on it you can't take it back. So this is my back side, this is my front side. So I'll take my template and very carefully line it up. Once you're happy with the position of your template, first thing you're going to do is draw in your midline here. And then, without moving everything, you're going to draw your shoulder line in. Again, This is one of the most important ones you're going to draw in at this point. Once you've got those in place, draw a stitch line for your neck hole. Make sure you're happy before you move everything. This line here isn't dark enough for me to actually see, so I'm just going to go over it again before I move everything over. Now, the last thing you're going to need to do is draw in the line for your keyhole slit. Now I pierce a tiny hole in there, give it a good wiggle. Yeah, I've got a lovely spot there now to work from. So take that away. Line up with the lines you've just made. Draw in your keyhole slit line. Now what I do is I just come ever so slightly to each side, about 2mm, 3mm. And I draw in stitch lines either side of the midline to keep me on a nice straight path when I'm doing that path of sewing. Don't need to go down to here, because what you're going to do is just make a little V there when you come to sew it. What we now have is our facing marked up and ready to sew on. Now what you can do to make it a little bit easier to line everything up, once you've got all that drawn in place, is just extend the lines you've drawn right the way up top and bottom. Same for these shoulder line pieces here. Because those 4 cardinal points, north, south, east and west, are what you're going to use to line your facing up in exactly the right position for the final stage. Okay, we're now ready to pin our neck piece to the main body piece of our tunic or dress. Now to begin, you need to have your main body piece fabric wrong side up, so that your right side is facing downwards. You can tell here from the seam that this is my wrong side. Your facing piece is going to be placed right side down. So in this case, the wrong side of the back piece meets the right side of the front piece, and that's very, very important to get everything right when you're turning it at the end. So once you've got your pieces ready, you may have a nice flat felled shoulder seam like I've got here, or you may have a single felled seam. If you've got a single felled seam, make sure that you are lining up with the stitch line and not the turned hem there with the whip stitches in. You want to be absolutely in line with the top of your shoulders. Now if you haven't got a seam in the top of your tunic or dress, you need to mark that before you begin. So you fold this main body piece exactly in half and either draw in a line or mark with pins your shoulder seam. It's easiest to lightly draw in a line, because until you've actually laid the facing on, you don't know exactly how far you're going to have to come across. So to begin, you need to line up your facing piece at the shoulder marks here. These marks that we made just to the outside of the circle here need to be exactly in line with your shoulder line here. Now once you've placed that on, what you're going to need to do is measure halfway exactly between the 2 sides of your main body piece, and mark that just at the bottom here and just at the top. And then what you want to do is make sure that these midlines and these shoulder lines all line up on your facing piece. Here's one I faffed about with earlier to get it in the right place to show you now, because that takes quite a while sometimes, of just little tiny adjustments up and down to make sure you've got everything exactly where you want it. Once you're happy, pop a pin in the middle here and just feel either side. If you've got a seam, it actually makes it a little bit easier, because you can just feel down the sides to make sure that your centre line is right all the way along. You need to make sure this line is fairly straight when you start, because if it's all wibbly wobbly, it won't be where you want it at the end. So once you have measured and checked that your side, at the sides, you've got nice equal distribution. I'm extremely happy with that. Then you're ready to begin pinning. So when I'm pinning, I begin obviously with the centre, and then I mark all the way down, making sure that all that stays exactly in line for the rest of the process, because it can be a little bit tricky to not move this whilst you're pinning it. You won't regret more pins, but you might regret not enough. And you're going to pin again like we did with making this line, either side of the facing all the way around, and either side down here as well. You don't need to put many pins in this outer ring, but a few will definitely be helpful just to keep everything stable while you're working. Now, two things I want to show you before we carry on. You'll notice that all of my pins run in the same direction. That is because when you actually start sewing this with so many pins, it's actually quite difficult not to stab yourself repeatedly. However, having all the pins running in the direction that you're going to sew, I start here and work my way all around this way. Having them all in the same direction stops you spiking yourself so much. Secondly, you'll notice that I'm not pinning on the line, I'm pinning either side of it. And that is because that allows me to keep sewing on the line and then take the pins out once I'm absolutely certain that that line is where I want it. What we're going to do now is sew all the way around this edge using the running stitch that we used for this outer edge here. You may want to try and get these stitches as small and tight as you can, because this is the edge that's going to take the wear from being around the neck. So you do want to be extra careful that you're getting a lot of little stitches in here. Make sure to carefully reinforce the points here and your V at the bottom here. These are the places where you want to add a few back stitches just to give it extra strength. And here we are. We've gone all the way around the outside and we're ready to cut out our neck hole. Now, this can be a little bit tricky. The way I do it is I start here, just make a little snip, just there. Go all the way around before attempting the keyhole slip. Once you've gone all the way around, if you've got any bits that have come in a bit too far, just go around and trim those off so you've got a nice even seam allowance. This is about 5mm. That's about the widest that I find you can get away with to get a nice smooth curve to the neck. What we're going to do now is very carefully cut down the middle of our keyhole slip. You need to keep exactly in the middle as you go down. Take your time. When you get to this very end point, you're going to take it within 2 to 3 threads of the final point. You can also just put a tiny little cut there if you want to. Getting that point as close as you can will help you achieve a nice pointed V at the bottom when you turn it, and that's what we're going to do next. Now this is the really exciting bit where you get to see the results of all your hard work. I start with these points to turn it nicely. Push your thumb inside. You can use something like a chopstick to help you ease this round if you want to. Just leave that like that, you don't have to work that point all the way out at the beginning. Come to the other side. Same again. Then flip underneath. Now this one, look in there, it's just trying to resist a little bit, so I'm going to come back and check what's going on here, because that needs a tiny bit more taking out. All the way around, and then we're going to flip it. Now don't panic, it will look dreadful at first, but with the cunning use of chopsticks, fingers and irons, we're going to make this look gorgeous. You can see there, I've just rolled that seam with my fingers to get it in where I want it. Do the same again, all the way around, and then when you're finished, give it a press. Now we're ready to press our seam in place. Then we're going to pin it down and whip stitch all the way around the edge here. I'll show you the technique I used to make those stitches almost invisible in just a moment. Okay, we've given this a good press. Carry on manipulating with your fingers as you press, obviously keeping your fingers out of the way of the iron, just to get everything where you want it. Once you've finished, pin all the way around the outside and we're ready to whip stitch the facing piece down to our main body piece. To sew the facing down to the main body piece, we're going to be using a whip stitch. Now, this particular kind of whip stitch is a little bit different because you have to be quite precise in where you bring your needle out and where you go back in to get an almost invisible line around the outside here. So I've attached my thread to the back of my work just there. I'm going to bring my needle up and out right in the middle of that line there. To go back in, you need to come just inside where your facing's going to lay. Just in there. Come back out again, making sure to catch this top piece as you do. What you don't want to do is come up in between like this. That won't do you any good. You need to very precisely come up just there. Secure the thread down on this one. This is trying to be a bit awkward because this bit is where we left our opening. So just manipulated that back where I want it. Back in. Just through there. Back in, just inside, so that where the thread re-enters the main body piece ends up being almost invisible when you're finished, which is why you want to use thread that matches your facing piece rather than your main body piece for this section of sewing. You can see there the stitches are almost invisible. It does take some patience, but it's very much worth it for the finished result. As you work any little bits you're not happy with, use your fingers to manipulate them into the right position before you make your stitch. Now if you need to replace your thread, I'm going to show you how I make an invisible join. So you start your stitch as normal, going through to the other side. Come just to the inside of your seam allowance so that you're not letting anything show on the right side of the work. Make a very tiny stitch just through the first two layers, not through the outside of the facing, and tie that off. We'll use a double knot. Now to hide this end, what you're going to do is just come in right there, move the needle between the layers of fabric, and then you can just trim that off and you've got a nice invisible finish. On the outside you don't see anything, but inside you know. To attach your new thread, the procedure is exactly the same but in reverse. Start a little way off, ease between the layers of fabric till you come back to where you started. Leave a little tail of thread out of there while you secure this one. The needle in roughly the right place. Then come out at the top of the stitch as you've been doing all the way along, and continue all the way around. Huge thank yous to everybody who's made it this far. Your patience is about to be rewarded because we are almost there. If you found this video helpful, please give me a like or pop a comment in the comments section for me. Everyone helps me to know what I'm doing right or where I need to improve. And they almost always make me do the happy dance. Here we go, folks. And here we are, our finished neckline. Please ignore the lack of sleeves, I've not got to that bit yet. You can see it lays absolutely beautifully. Fantastic thing is that now you've got this technique down, you can make so many other types of neckline. Let's have a look, shall we? For a simple keyhole neckline, inverting your colours can really make the neckline pop. You may choose to add some tiny decorative stitches around the outline of your neck piece to reinforce your seam, or go full bling and add some tablet braid over your seam. Adding braid over seams is a period technique. And why not try a round neck? Make the head hole the same size as your head circumference and omit the keyhole slit. And for some authentic budget bling, why not try a wrapped cord around the inside of the neckline and a 4-strand braid to cover your seams. Like a Skolderham style V-neck? The original find uses a different technique, but you can modify this one to get the same effect. On this higher status Anglo-Saxon dress, I've kept it simple to frame the bling. Nice. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. If you would like to learn how to do the cuffs in this similar fashion, hit subscribe or click up here in the future when I've finished it, and you'll see the link to the video on how I make those.